Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to tonight's meeting of Stanley Town Council. It's taking place in the Civic Hall in Stanley on 22nd of March 2022, and the proceedings will be recorded and uploaded onto YouTube, I think. I was going to say Facebook there, but maybe not. Can I just remind you all that if you want to speak, you need to press the button. And I know I'm the worst offender of this one, but it won't hit the recording if the button hasn't been pressed. Okay. Right. So, moving swiftly on tonight's agenda. Apologies for absence.
We've got apologies from Katie Coulson this evening.
Thank you. Declarations of interest. Have we any declarations of interest for any of the items on tonight's agenda? No? No. Okay. Thank you. Mayor's announcements. Just at this moment, I haven't any announcements to make. Thank you.
Mayor, I've got a couple of announcements this evening. We obviously lost Alan Tubman last week, and we've brought in Sarah on a temporary basis. So tonight is Sarah's first meeting, and obviously we're currently reviewing lots of things. So Sarah is here temporarily, so she's joined the team from yesterday. So I'd like to welcome Sarah. Just a little reminder about the Mayor's Awards. We're still waiting for any submissions for anybody who wants to nominate for a Mayor's Awards. We've also received a letter from the NHS for our incoming Mayor, whoever that may be, in relation to considering them as their charity when they're talking about who they're going to support for their mayoral year. I want to provide just a brief update in relation to double taxation that we received. Well, actually, I received at 2:10 today from CDALC. Basically, the CDALC Executive Committee met on the 2nd of March and agreed in principle not to pursue the issue of double taxation any further with DCC. We've been asked to report back to yourselves on this, but should you wish to make any further comment as to why the Executive Committee shouldn't proceed with its decision in principle, they want to hear from us before the 30th of April. So that's in relation to that. And finally, I just want to thank all the residents of Stanley and the surrounding areas for their contribution to our Ukraine appeal. It was fabulous. And I also want to give special thanks to Councillors Joe McMahon and Carl Marshall, who travelled to the Ukraine as a party of 12 and helped deliver much needed supplies to those people of Ukraine. So thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Right, we now move on to public participation. I don't believe there are any members of the public present. Oh, sorry, leader's statement. I missed you. Moving down too fast, sorry.
Okay, evening everyone. This has been a very eventful month since our last meeting, where we've said goodbye to some amazing staff who've moved on to pastures new, and we wish them a lot of luck in their new roles. And we would also like to welcome new members of staff who are working with us now to keep our establishment up to full strength. So welcome to Sarah and Michelle again. The next thing I want to move on to is the Civic Hall. Just by means of context, and please bear with us here for this history lesson, for the time that I know of anyway. When I became a councillor in 2007 and the chair of finance, I started working with the RFO at the time to try and make ways that we present our finances more understood for councillors and more easy and transparent for the public to be able to see. And this wasn't an easy process. And for me, one of the main reasons for doing it was to ascertain how the public purse was being spent, and in particular, how much the Civic Hall Theatre was being subsidised through that public purse. My long-term aim was to try and move the theatre onto a more business-like footing and stop the drain on STC finances. And that work had reached a position where there was a financial understanding around our councillors at the time, and a bit of clarity about how much was being spent to support theatre productions and group attendances. And then along came COVID, and we were in essence closed for quite a few years, delaying this work moving on to its next step. But in September 2021, when I became leader for STC, I appointed an interim town clerk, Stuart Wardle, and asked him to pick up the refresh of the D3 report. This had been commissioned by the establishment at the time of 2014, and that report was to examine the condition of the Civic Hall building, which was leased from Durham County Council, and give some clear recommendations about how to manage that building going forward from that point. Most of the recommendations made by the report, which included an ongoing maintenance contract with DCC, were simply not implemented. And some simple cosmetic work was undertaken at that time, really putting sticking plasters over serious wounds. The current refreshed D3 report was presented to Council on Wednesday of the 16th of March, and it was clear that the overall costs attached to this condition report were extremely substantial, getting very close to £1 million. Obviously, sums of this magnitude are outside the ability of Stanley Town Council, and we are now being faced with some very difficult decisions. This situation has been further compromised by the heating being condemned by Durham County Council, meaning that from Tuesday, the 15th of March, we've ceased to have any heating in this building whatsoever. So conversations have been had with Durham County Council to see what the future may be, but we simply as a town council can't afford to undertake the repairs required by ourselves. So we are asking Durham County Council, as our landlord, to work with us to try to save our building for the community, because we can't do it alone. We would be happy to work in partnership with Durham County Council, who own the building, to seek funding. There's the Stanley Level and Upgrade, there's Stanley's Town and Villages Fund. We could look to seeking funding from the Arts Council, but we need their expertise and their support in all of these ventures. The alternative is we will need to hand back our lease, and Durham County Council would then need to close this building. We are asking our Derwenside Independent Town and County Councillors, Joan Nicholson and Christine Bell, to bring their influence to bear on their cabinet colleagues. We need them to invest in the people of Stanley, to fight, to save our building for our community. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you for that, Jeanette. Right. We now move on to public participation. And as there are no members of the public present, do we have any questions that have been put to the council? Okay. We're now moving the item 11, the police update, up to the next item, because I think you've been here long enough. Okay. As you were here, and you were very well. We realise you've been at work all day. Okay. So over to you.
Mayor, if I could, just before Inspector Stewart starts,
sorry.
it's all right. I met with Inspector Stewart and Sergeant Archbold midweek in relation to the vehicles that Stanley Town Council purchased to using in conjunction with the police and the work that we do within the neighbourhood. These vehicles are now 3 years old. One will be 3 years old on Friday. The other one's got a couple of months left on its lifespan. But the conversation we had was that now that they're 3 years old and they're out of the sort of deal that we had, to enable them to keep them in service, the police would like us to support them again, which would mean a contribution from Stanley Town Council for £5,000 per van, and that's to keep them in in service really. They're looked after, the MOTs, the servicing, the signage on them are still under the same terms that we currently have, whereas one of our neighbourhood wardens uses one sort of 9 till 5, and the other one's used predominantly by the police, well, all the time by the police. It's got a blue light on it and things like that, where the other one they use, if Dave Jarvis isn't using it through the day, is used by the police if they need it through the night. We've had a chat about it, and I'm sure Inspector Stewart will please talk about it. I do think it possibly needs a bigger conversation than making a decision this evening, but I'll let Inspector Stewart take over from that.
Right. Good evening, anyone. I recognise quite a few faces around the room, and I promise I'll stand up before I go out. So for anyone who has never met me or doesn't know me, my name's Dave Stewart. I'm the Neighbourhood Policing Inspector for Stanley and Consett. To my left is my Sergeant at Southmoor, Terry Archbold. So if we get into the vehicles thing first of all then, when I first came here about 3.5 years ago, one of my first jobs was to basically get the vehicles here that had already been agreed. So I'm going to keep this really simple because that's the way I understand things. There's a contract between Stanley Town Council and Durham Constabulary, and there has been before these vehicles, but these two current van vehicles are the most recent iteration of that. Essentially, the contract is Stanley Town Council buy the vehicles, purchase the vehicles at quite a significant discount through the police fleet scheme that there is. The vehicles then have to meet the police standard of service and of quality, if you like, etc. So essentially the deal is Stanley Town Council purchase the vehicles and pay for an element of the servicing of them. What Durham Constabulary do in this joint venture is we basically put people in the vehicles all the time and use them all the time, and the servicing gets done through our fleet, as all of the police vehicles get done through our fleet, and they get specced out as they need to get specced out. So in its simplest terms, that is the contract that we have. When we come to the end of the contract every 3 years, the vehicles go out of warranty. So what Helen's referring to is our fleet have come back to me and said, well, clearly there might be a conversation to be had about whether the joint initiative between Stanley Town Council and Durham Constabulary continues with new vehicles going forward, as it has done before. Or Fleet have said, these vehicles have been well maintained, they are still in good order, and for a cost of £5,000 per vehicle, they can be kept on the road. That's per annum, sorry. There is a caveat to that, and that is that if there's some sort of catastrophic failure on the vehicle that's outside of the warranty that can't be repaired and they become an economic write-off, that would be the end of their lifespan. So in essence, there is a slight gamble to that, in that if the £5,000 was paid and then the next week something massive happened to it that can't be fixed, then that would be the end of it. So that is the conversation to be had, basically, to say whether we continue in partnership as we have done over the years with Stanley Town Council and ourselves as to the vehicles that are funded. Are there any questions about that? I know that's not necessarily a conversation for right now, but that's the essence of it.
I thought the contract was for 5 years and then vehicles.
No.
The cars were.
Right. Well, these vans were 3 years.
So it's a long time to get the vans.
Well, it's 3 years from when the vans when they arrived. So it's the full 3 years. And to be fair, I wasn't here prior to the vans coming, but I might understand it was always 3 years, or
It's always been 3 years that I've known.
right.
Sorry, it's always been 3 years that I've known.
It's to do with the warranty, basically, isn't it? I don't know whether warranties would extend beyond 3 years anyway, necessarily, from the manufacturers. But I mean, just very, very quickly, because I thought the questions might be, well, what do they get used for? Well, what do they not get used for, basically? These are vehicles that, yes, one of them has the blue light functionality, which allows us to get the things on the hurry up. The van that Dave Jarvis uses, both the vans don't have a cage or any sort of cab in the back, so they're not for the transportation of prisoners, but they are for, well, whether we'll come on to this later on, discussing policey things, but things like cannabis grows, for example, when they have to be dismantled, are massively resource intensive and massively equipment intensive, not just the equipment you need to get there to dismantle them, but also the stuff that you're bringing out of there as well. So having vans like that, which is the conversation I think 3 years ago, and I wasn't privy to all of it, was that vans were a better option than the Pandas because they're just more versatile. Any other questions on that? No? Right. So I've introduced myself. Alan Tubman had invited us to a couple of council meetings before. Oh,
Sorry, I just wanted to say that I think it's for a conversation for another day, that we need to think about that later.
yeah, well, what Fleet have said is that the vehicle that runs out, is it this? Yeah, Friday. They've said as long as we're in conversation about it, they'll keep it on the road. So I think there's that safety net there. Yeah, so I think Alan Tubman invited us to a couple of dates that were financial meetings or something. So we had them in the diary, then we had them out the diary because we didn't need to come, and then we had this one. Alan didn't strictly say what we were coming for, other than we're being invited. So we did ask Helen last week, and I asked, well, look, if there are any questions prior to our attendance, if anyone wants to put any questions down, so it doesn't just become, can I answer them off the top of my head? We have a little chance to think about them. And I did get some from an email from someone. But I mean, I suppose I speak in things like the AAP and other meetings that I've had with various of you, and I don't want to repeat myself time and time again. So if you don't mind, I'll just address the questions that were emailed through to us, which are on the subject of antisocial behaviour. And then if there's any other questions, we'll take them. Excuse me while I put my reading glasses on and try and read my own handwriting. There's a question about, do we put youths in front of the youth court? Well, the answer is yes. But I've put in brackets there eventually, because actually going to youth court is the end part of the process. And the idea is that not everybody gets there. In fact, it's the hope that young people don't get there in front of the court. And it normally means that they're stalled on or haven't engaged with various parts of the youth justice process before that. So yes is the overall answer. I mean, I suppose this year probably the headline one was a youth who was involved in antisocial behaviour back in the autumn, who ultimately ended up going to court in respect of a knife point robbery, and is currently supervision order. And do you know what? We can say up to this point it's done the job, in that we don't hear from that person anymore. It's an awful shame that it got to that sort of level, mind, but that's the fact. The second question was, do the police think that the youth justice system deal with youths appropriately? Well, that's asking for an opinion from me. I think what I would say is that I think they try and address the right things. When someone's referred into the youth justice process and the youth justice service, what the agencies try and do from there is look at all the reasons behind why someone's offending. It's not just about, well, let's whiz them off to court, give them a punishment, and that'll solve it, because that rarely does. It's about looking at the families, it's about looking at the background, it's looking at the reasons behind the behaviour that they're demonstrating. Does that always work? No. That's why some of them end up at youth court ultimately. Do I think it's right that agencies try to address all the issues behind those things? Yes, I do. We did a Stay Safe operation at the venue, I want to say November time. And some of those kids that we brought in came in full of hell in the first instance and wouldn't speak to us, and were going out of the way not to speak to us. But after about 20 minutes, half an hour, and they'd calmed themselves down a bit, and they understood why they were there and why we were there to speak to them. It was quite interesting. I mean, you spoke to some of the kids, and actually, for all that the behaviour is not acceptable, there's stories behind each and every one of those, and you get to understand some of the things, some of the challenges that they've got in their life as well. And while I'm not saying for a minute that excuses it, and I'm a police officer of 27 years, so trust me, I'm probably regarded as quite cynical because of that length of service, but I do think it's an example of why the youth justice system, in addressing all those things, is the right way to do it. Hope that answers that question. Are police keeping an eye on the front street, the bus station, Clifford Road, etc.? Yes, we'll come on to the bus station. That's the next question. Yeah, we do. Just for a bit of reality, youth antisocial behaviour accounts for 5.5% of all the incidents that occur in Stanley. Now, I'm acutely aware of the impact of youth antisocial behaviour on the community and on everyone, and I'm here to say that there are massively disproportionate amount of our time, resources and effort and other agencies go into dealing with that. But ultimately it is 5.5%, and that means that all of the other things that we have to deal with, whether it be the management of registered sex offenders, whether it be very serious high harm crimes, domestic incidents, I could list them all. There has to be some reality around what's possible. Obviously my neighbourhood team, as well as dealing with the investigative side of serious offences, dealing with the management of registered sex offenders, are heavily involved in antisocial behaviour and are tackling that. Anyone who's heard me speak in the AAP and any of these other meetings have an update on what we do, how we approach it. It's not a scattergun ad hoc approach. We do try and identify the main players because I think they have an influence on others, and we try and sort of take them out first and get them dealt with first. In terms of patrolling, I have effectively at the moment 3 PCs across Stanley who are basically fit to do patrols. I have a number of PCSOs, but to cover 7 days a week and all those hours in the, I'll not say 24 hours a day, because I don't think ASB necessarily happens 24 hours a day, is a challenge. We've spoken before about the fact that the neighbourhood team, because of the shift pattern, we try and address demand, but there is not a late turn neighbourhood policing function on a Monday and a Tuesday night. So they finish at 5 o'clock and that's when they finish. But that enables them to come back on again and deal with things during the day. So do we keep paying attention to the area? Yes, we do. The bus station specifically, the question was, what can we do? I'd probably turn that back on what have we done. So anyone who knows the bus station knows that over the years, and this precedes my time here, with the bus station, it has been a lure, a draw for young people, and that's because of its size, the lighting, the warmth, the free Wi-Fi, the space, you name it, that the bus station offered. Many things have been tried, including piping classical music in, piping mosquito noise in, which is only heard and bothers younger people. Security guards have been put on there at various times. These things haven't particularly worked to great effect, as people will know, because the antisocial behaviour continues. And then people who would have been in meetings like MAPS and what have you a few years ago will know that we came up with the thought of trying to design the problem out, and the council, Durham County Council, put in shutters, which made the bus station a smaller place and less attractive, with only one entrance and one exit after a certain time of night. I believe it's 6:30. Durham Police was so committed to that even though so 5 of the 7 nights a week, my PCSOs actually physically go and put those shutters down every night. I think initially there was going to be some sort of joint working, but that fell by the wayside. But we continue to do that, and we still continue to do that to this day. So every day that we're in, when we work a back turn, we put those shutters down. Now, Durham Police don't do that for every other retail premises in Stanley. It's something that we do specifically for the bus station to address that. More recently, antisocial behaviour in the bus station, almost like a victim of our success. It's not so much in the bus station as now outside the bus station, in the concourse, in the surrounding area. So I get it. It's been somewhat displaced. The numbers are down from what they were at the height of the winter, but I'll never say that the problem is solved. I'll just update it on a regular basis, and we'll see where we are. I was asked, summer is approaching. Are the police... summer approaching, and basically I think the question was, which means there'll be potentially more kids out for longer because of the light, etc. And are we prepared for that? My staffing doesn't change in the summer. In fact, like most businesses and probably the council, I have less because people go on holiday in the summer and they have time off. So we have what we have. We have the tactics that we have, and they'll continue to be deployed. What you tend to find in the summer is that there'll probably be more incidents reported from parks and places like that than there is perhaps the centre of town. And then finally, has there been any, I think the question was something like, has there been any improvement in offences? I mean, if I look on year-on-year figures and try and compare this year to a lockdown year when kids weren't allowed out, then it looks pretty horrendous because the figures have skyrocketed from a very low base. But what I can say is that youth antisocial behaviour is down 36% this month, which is just figures at the end of the day, because if there's some significant incidents of antisocial behaviour, they will stick in everyone's memory and they will be impactful on them. So I kind of get that. But yes, the one thing I will say that I've said before in the meetings is it is a difficult challenge. Working with the young people can be difficult, and especially difficult, and I said this to the PCVC when she was here, is if my staff are taking kids from the town centre who've been committing antisocial behaviour, they're taking them home and they're speaking to the parents and they're leaving them in the safety of their parents, and then 15 minutes later they're back on the town centre again. Well, that's when our powers become a little bit redundant, because we don't have that level of control over the parenting that we would perhaps like. But that's not always the case. I think the majority of kids in Stanley are really good, are really community focused, are just nice kids. I think the majority of parents are as well. Unfortunately, the kind of incidents that we all talk about and think about are the minority of people who cause these things. So that was the questions that I had on the email. I don't know if there are any other questions for us before we let you get on with the rest of your meeting.
I believe the police has been having like a recruitment, and I'm just wondering if you know if Stanley has been allocated any extra police officers within that recruitment. If so, how many?
Right, so within the police service we have different commands, we call them. So we have, you'll know what I'm talking about when I say CID, traffic, response, neighbourhood policing, safeguarding. The increase, if you like, are in the areas of high harm. So detective vacancies have got to be filled first. Safeguarding vacancies have to be filled first. That's what the decision is, and to be honest, I don't fall out with it, because it is right that we tackle those things, and we have the people who are skilled enough to do that and qualified to do that. In terms of neighbourhood policing, which is what I represent when I'm here, what we have done, I was talking to our Assistant Chief Constable today who came up here from Suffolk Constabulary, and they essentially got rid of, certainly in Norfolk, all of the PCSOs, and in Suffolk, out of a team of or a number of 150, got rid of 100. Durham Constabulary haven't done that. Durham Constabulary have continued to staff fully the PCSOs. They are the cornerstone of neighbourhood policing. I genuinely don't know what I would do without them. My history is that I was on response for 20 odd years, and I think at that time I did not understand the value of police community support officers. I've learned very fast in the time that I've been here. We are fully staffed at Stanley with police community support officers. We're about to get a new one on Terry's team. In terms of police officers, and I think you always need an element of police officers to have the warranted powers to be able to do some of the things that we have to do. We are down in numbers at the moment. Is that situation going to improve? The honest answer is I don't know. But I know currently there are some other priorities in terms of safeguarding CID before we get to neighbourhood policing.
Just a couple of comments, really, rather than a question. I mean, since 2010, we've seen a significant reduction in the resources available to the police, in particular in County Durham and in Stanley, where the sort of the funding of the police has been pushed onto a local precept as opposed to from core grant. And was having such a low council tax base across the county, you know, we're never going to be able to retain some of the levels of funding that other parts of the country have. So until that changes, you know, we've basically just got to, I think as a force, you've just got to deal with the hand that you've been dealt, you know. So it is difficult. I think from my experience, what I've seen is a really good policing team in Stanley who all go above and beyond. I think we've seen huge pressures on the police because not just because of COVID, but because of the reduction in resources, and because of some of the other changes to the welfare state, cuts to youth services, cuts to some of the support services that used to be provided within the local authority as well. You know, those things just aren't there. You know, and that's a political choice from the government, in my view. The Tories have screwed us all over in County Durham and in the North East, so I've got some big issues with that. But I think locally, you know, I've seen and experienced firsthand some of the brilliant work that our policing teams do. You know, dealing with the knock-on effect to changes to the welfare system, dealing with, you know, being first on scene for dealing with dead bodies, with suicide, saving people's lives with the control room, keeping people on the phone for longer till they can get the local beat team there. Our local community policing team in Stanley are usually the first on scene for any incident. They're expected to be ambulancemen, firemen and policemen, as well as social workers and everything else. So I just want to say, from my perspective, based on my experience over the sort of past 4 or 5 years in particular, massive thank you to you and the team, and I appreciate if you'd pass that back to them, because I think you know, we've got an exceptional policing team who do everything they can to keep us safe and to work with the community here.
Thanks, Carl. And something I should have mentioned as well is that you talk about there is an increase in the number of police officers from. So we went through cuts a few years ago, and the numbers are starting to increase, because I see that, because you see new officers coming through all the time. I know your direct question was how will Stanley benefit from that. I think that the response teams are looking to be as fully staffed as they can be, and I think that's important because, you know, as Carl mentioned, the response teams are the ones who, every minute of every day, no matter what we're doing, whether we're asleep, awake or whatever, they're there and ready to rock and roll for any job that comes in, and those teams are being increased by the new recruits coming in. What you find is, the reality of life is that when those new recruits come in, they're quite inexperienced at first, and they've got to learn the job, and then the more experienced cops on the teams will then diverse into things like CID, into things like safeguarding, into traffic and things like that. So yes, there is an increase in officers into Durham Constabulary from the base that there was. And do you know what? Yeah, there's a new shift pattern there for the response teams now, which balances up the daytime numbers and the nighttime numbers, so that the service during the night can be the same at the same level as it is during the day. So yeah, I mean, the answer is there are increases. I think at Stanley, what we find is, depending on what the incident pad looks like, we might have to send resources to the east of the county or the south of the county to help them with jobs pads that are far in advance of the numbers that we're dealing with. But I think that's right, you move your resources to where they need to be. Hopefully that answers your question.
Is that the end of the questions for anyone else? Got anything would like to? Right. Well, I would just like to thank Terry and Dave for coming in and for giving us the information. And
You're welcome.
You can go home now.
Just look pressing that button.
Right. Thank you very much. Thanks. Right. Right, we're now back on track again. So we're item 6 now is confirmation of the minutes, to approve as a record and sign the minutes of the ordinary council meeting 22nd of February 2022. Could I have a proposal for that? Okay, seconder Sam or Christine, whichever. Right. Receipt of committee minutes, to receive the minutes from the Finance and General Purposes Committee 15th of February 2020, which are attachment B, and accounts for payment and bank reconciliation. Could we take those two together? Can we? Right. Would somebody propose them? All right. Propose them. Are you seconding them, Christine? Thank you. That's right. Any matters arising from any of the last lot of minutes? No? Thank goodness for that. Right. Right. Item 9 is budget monitoring report, which is at attachment F. The committee is requested to note the budget monitoring report for quarter 3 2021-22. Everyone okay with that? Okay. Right. Internal audit reports. We're just asked to note the reports from the internal audit. Attachment G, H, I and J. That okay, everybody? Yeah, okay. Police update, we've already had that, thank you very much. The D3 report on the Civic Hall, is this you, Helen? Yeah.
Yep, me
Right.
again. Obviously, Jeanette's already touched on some of the issues in relation to the Civic Hall, but I suppose I just want to give you a little bit more of an in-depth update with regards to what's happened over the week. So as Jeanette touched on, the heating went off last Tuesday. So at the moment, we're literally just heating the rooms we're using. So if we've got any groups come in, we're transporting heaters into that room to heat that room, and then we switch them off and take them out, which is why I'm sorry it's a bit chilly in here tonight. So we met with DCC on Monday and we sent the condition report over to them. They are going to go away, have a conversation. We have asked them to do it quickly because obviously now that the heating's gone off, it needs to be dealt with quite urgently. Bearing in mind we still have lots of people using the building at the moment. So we're waiting for them to come back to us. We have had a quote for a temporary boiler unit from DCC, and they've quoted us £20,000 to have that temporary boiler unit brought in, attached to the current pipework in the boiler room. However, Stuart and I were talking yesterday in relation to the boiler, bearing in mind the building's currently has been running for possibly the last 5 years on one boiler, and it's always been quite toasty running on one boiler. So we had a heating engineer out today to provide a quote to provide one boiler to get the building up and running again as a possible option. Is to where we are now, and basically that boiler would have, because it would need a new flue because you can't use the old flues. That one boiler, depending on what the outcome was going forward, could be attached to other boilers if you chose, or whoever chose to put 5 boilers in. However, it is expected to be a lot cheaper than £20,000. So it's an option that I feel as though we do need to get, so that when decisions are being made, they're being made with the full facts. We do have some big events booked in coming up, so obviously we are hoping that we can still commit to those big events. It's not so bad when we've got a big event in the hall because the body heat keeps it nice and warm. It's it's when we're using the smaller committee rooms that it can be quite cool. So it's just to basically update you on where the current position is now. So it's just to note that update.
Okay. Right. Item 30. Oh, sorry, I didn't.
Yeah, I mean, I think we need to make sure we put our request to the County Council in writing if that hasn't been done already. There's a couple of things with it, isn't there? I mean, there's the Siamese boiler situation where our boilers have been sort of heating one point as well, so there is a bit of a collective responsibility, I think, to try and maintain the boiler system. But clearly, if we can sort that out at the same time as this, that would help going forward. It sort of throws up a whole host of questions really about the original decision when this building was taken on, about the due diligence that was done by the council at that time for me, because there was a big grant, a big sort of loan that the council took out at that time to maintain the building by the people who were running the council. There's probably some questions to be asked about what's happened with that, because I tend to agree with what Jeanette said, that the people running the council at the time probably painted the walls and, you know, put new flooring down and carpets and stuff, but actually there was much bigger things and priorities for that investment, and that's come back to bite us now. It's clearly a lot of money. I think all of us sitting here wouldn't want to see this building go. It's become a really valuable, not just theatre and arts venue, but community asset, which was demonstrated through COVID. I think we need to make the point to the county council about the City of Culture bid, because for me, I've got some huge concerns that is going to be a City of Culture, not a County of Culture. You know, if they're going to have arts venues like this closing in the run up to that, I think it's an absolute disgrace. So we need to probably put something in writing to them, requesting for some support. They are the owners of the building, we are the tenants. And the final point I want to make really was around the staffing, because you know, it is quite chilly in here tonight, and we're only in here for an hour or so. The staff are based in here all day, every day, and it can't be good just moving heaters around the building. So this needs to be something that's looked at quite urgently, and something brought back to members. That's before you get into some of the greener technologies and systems that we might have preferred to look at. But you know, it's not a particularly clever situation that we'll find ourselves in. Right, Chair, can I just add as well, I mean, at a time when the County Council's looking at sticking 16 million into a brand new arts venue with Akeley Heads, surely they can find a little bit of money to pay for a boiler in Stanley. It's a disgrace.
Can I just say that I obviously agree with Carl, that I think the County Council do need to do something, but it's not just been this recent County Council. I sat on the Civic Hall board along with Alex, and we asked many questions and many things on many occasions about this building. And as far as I was concerned, we got very little back from them either. So we need to bear in mind that it's not just what's happening now. This has been a continual process over more than just the last couple of years.
Okay, anyone else? While we're kicking it around? No? Okay. Right. Item 13, Events 2022. It's attachment K. We're just requested to note the minutes of the Events Working Group and approve the recommendations of Financial General Purposes Committee on the 8th of March. That option 1 is the preferred programme for 2022 events. Has everyone had a chance to look at it? Yeah. Can we approve it?
Yes.
Are we? Okay, right. Staffing update. You've more or less done it, haven't you? Yeah.
It's pretty much just to give a little bit more of an in-depth sort of view of what is happening in the office. We have lost some very key staff. However, I've also come in. There are lots of changes happening, especially in relation to the building. Rather than dive in and replace staff with permanent members of staff where we might find we have square pegs and round holes, we've taken the decision to bring in temporary members of staff who the team are reviewing processes and procedures within the office to see actually what Stanley Town Council need. You know, that obviously will be impacted upon what happens with the building. You know, we're streamlining the way we work. You know, so there's lots happening in the office. Anybody is more than welcome to come in and have a more in-depth chat. We can talk you through with what we're actually looking at. Not only are we're streamlining Stanley Town Council administration processes, but we're also looking at the event side of it, because we still have people booked in. We still need to give them the best experience they can possibly have, and we still need to, you know, to put a face on Stanley Town Council. We don't want any sort of reputational damage. And that's what we need to keep pushing, an excellent reputation if you come to, whether you're visiting us as the council or you're visiting us as the events side of it. you're going to get a good experience regardless of which side you come and visit us on. So that's where we are with the staffing at the moment.
Right, thanks for that, Helen. The next item, I don't know, Fool's Gold, who are well, duo, aren't they? Yeah. Yes. Who've I put in a request from a group to partner with the council for the development of a new show. Well, I think that we're just going to have to say, we'll just have to explain to them why that might not be something that we can do.
I'll contact them and find out a little bit more in depth about exactly what they want. From this letter, my understanding is they have applied for a grant, but they need us to submit it on their behalf for them. So I'll contact them. But if you are happy to consider being a partner, I can provide an update. Yeah.
I think, yeah, I don't know. How does anyone feel about that? Sorry, okay, yeah.
I was going to say, Chair, there's two steps to this, isn't it? The first one is being an accountable body for a grant, which is the first bit. So if we can get some extra money into Stanley, then that's got to be a good thing. And then the second thing is a venue. So I would imagine if this venue is not available, we'll have to try and work with them to find an alternative venue. But we can't get the grant without us agreeing to work with them. I think that's the issue. I'm happy to support it.
Right, we're now down to item 16, date, time and venue of the next meeting, Tuesday the 26th of April, 6:30. Yeah, thank you for your attendance, ladies and gentlemen.
Just before everybody packs up, you'll have all have seen the cinema days during the school holidays. For those of you who have children, friends have children, please, please, please push the cinema days. They're going to be great.